My name is Jolene, and I'm 35 years old. I remember the exact moment my entire world collapsed, not because of the job loss, but because of what happened after. I had worked at Hargrove Financial Solutions for 11 years. 11 years of early mornings, skipped lunches, and covering for colleagues who never once said thank you. I was a senior accounts manager, the kind of employee who got birthday cards from the CEO and thank you emails forwarded to the whole department. And then, on a Tuesday evening in October, my manager called me into a glass-walled conference room and told me the company was restructuring. My position was being eliminated. They handed me a folder with my severance paperwork, shook my hand, and that was it. 11 years, gone in 12 minutes. I drove home in a daze. My hands were on the wheel, but my mind was somewhere else entirely, running through calculations, thinking about bills, wondering how long my savings would carry me. I lived with my parents at the time, not because I couldn't afford my own place, but because my father had a heart procedure the previous year and my mother had asked me to stay close. I gave up my apartment, moved back into my childhood bedroom, and quietly became the person holding everything together. I paid the utility bills. I covered the grocery runs. I fixed the leaking pipe under the kitchen sink because my father's hands shook too much to hold a wrench. I didn't complain. I thought that's what family was. When I walked through the front door that evening and told my parents I had lost my job, I expected shock. Maybe some concern. Maybe my mother would put on tea and my father would tell me something would come through soon. Instead, my father looked at my mother and something passed between them, a look I didn't recognize at first. Then he stood up from his armchair, walked down the hall to my bedroom, and I heard the sound of my closet being opened. I followed him and found him pulling my clothes off their hangers and folding them into a suitcase that he had already pulled out from under the bed. I stood in the doorway and asked him what he was doing. He didn't look at me when he answered. He said, "Your sister needs this house more than you do." Just like that. Not, "I'm sorry this happened." Not, "Let's figure something out together." Just, "Your sister needs this more than you do." My sister Renata was 31, had never held a job for longer than 8 months, and had been living in an apartment across town that our parents had been quietly subsidizing for 2 years. I knew this because I had seen the bank transfers on a shared account I had access to. I never said a word about it. My mother appeared in the hallway behind me. I turned to her, genuinely believing she was about to say something to stop this. Instead, she crossed her arms and told me I was old enough to handle things on my own, that Renata had a baby on the way and needed stability. That was the first I had heard about any baby. No one had told me. I was the one living in the house, cooking dinner 3 nights a week, and no one had thought to mention that Renata was pregnant. Then Renata herself walked in through the front door. Apparently she had been called before I even arrived home, and the first thing she said, before hello, before any acknowledgement that I was standing right there watching my father pack my belongings, was, "Who's going to pay my car loan now?" That was her first sentence. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I heard what happened." Just, "Who's going to pay her car loan?" And my mother nodded like that was a completely reasonable thing to say. Like my unemployment was primarily an inconvenience to Renata's monthly expenses. I stood very still. I felt something shift inside me, quietly, like a door closing somewhere deep. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I thought about saying several things, about the utility bills I had been covering, about the grocery receipts I had never asked to be reimbursed for, about the fact that I had turned down a job offer in Seattle 2 years earlier because my mother said she needed me close. I thought about telling them about the company. I thought about mentioning the beach house. I said nothing. My father finished packing the suitcase. My mother handed me my car keys from the hook by the door like I might have forgotten where they were. Renata was already walking through the house, opening doors, looking at rooms like she was measuring furniture in her head. I picked up the suitcase. I walked to my car. I put the bag in the trunk and I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, looking at the house I had poured 2 years of my life into holding together. Then I drove away. What none of them knew, what I had never once mentioned, not to my mother, not to my father, not to Renata, was that 3 years earlier, I had quietly registered a small property holding company. And under that company's name, purchased a beach house 40 minutes outside the city. It had been my exit plan, built slowly and carefully, one transfer at a time. I had never told anyone because there was never a reason to. Until now, there was still no reason. But that was about to change. I drove to the beach house that night with one suitcase and no plan beyond getting through the next few hours without falling apart. The road was mostly empty, just highway lights and the occasional truck passing in the opposite direction, and I remember thinking how strange it was that the worst night of my life was also the quietest. No one was calling to check on me. My phone was completely silent the entire 40-minute drive. That silence told me everything I needed to know about what the last 2 years had actually meant to the people I had sacrificed them for. The beach house was a 3-bedroom property I had found through a foreclosure listing in the early spring 3 years ago. I had been saving quietly for years, long before I moved back home, putting money into a separate account that no one knew existed. When I saw the listing, something in me recognized it immediately, not as a vacation property, not as an investment, but as an exit. I registered the holding company, named it Clearwater Ridge LLC, made the purchase, and never mentioned it to a single person. I had a property manager handle the occasional rental when I didn't need it myself. The rental income went straight back into the maintenance fund. It was mine entirely and quietly mine, and for 3 years it had simply existed in the background of my life like a door I wasn't ready to open yet. That night I opened it. I carried my suitcase inside, turned on the kitchen light, and sat at the small wooden table by the window that looked out over the dark water. I made coffee because it was the only automatic thing I could think to do with my hands. I sat there until almost 2 in the morning, not crying, not panicking, just thinking with a clarity that I hadn't felt in a long time. Losing the job had felt like the end of something. But sitting in that kitchen, I realized it was actually the first honest moment I had experienced in years. I was no longer performing loyalty for people who had already decided I was expendable. The next morning I called my former colleague Iris, who had left Hargrove 8 months earlier to start her own financial consulting practice. We had stayed in touch loosely, the occasional coffee, a few text exchanges. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said she had been waiting for me to leave that company for 3 years and asked if I wanted to talk about coming on as a partner. I told her I needed a week to think. I spent that week at the beach house, walking in the mornings, sleeping properly for the first time in months, and going through my finances with a level of focus that the previous 2 years of exhaustion had made impossible. By Friday, I called Iris back and said yes. 3 weeks passed before my mother called me. Not to apologize. She called to ask if I could help Renata set up a baby registry account because Renata was having trouble with the website. That was the call. That was what broke the 3-week silence. I told my mother calmly that I wasn't available and that I hoped Renata figured it out, and I ended the call. My father never called at all. Renata sent me one text asking if I was still paying the streaming subscription we shared, and when I canceled it that same afternoon, I felt something close to satisfaction. The consulting partnership with Iris moved faster than either of us expected. Within 2 months, we had signed 4 clients, 2 of them mid-sized businesses that had been referred through a contact I had maintained from my years at Hargrove. The work was demanding, but it was ours. Every decision made between 2 people who respected each other. No corporate restructuring that could erase 11 years overnight. By the 5th month, I was earning more than I had at my previous job. By the 8th month, I had already started thinking about the next property. It was around that time that my Aunt Phyllis, my father's older sister, came to visit me at the beach house. She was the only person in the family I had told where I was living. She sat in the same kitchen chair I had sat in on that first night and looked around at the place with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then she told me that Renata had moved into my old bedroom at my parents' house and that the arrangement was already showing cracks. Renata's partner had left. The baby was due in 6 weeks, and my parents were now paying for everything because Renata had quit her latest job. My mother had apparently mentioned to Phyllis that she wondered if Jolene might be willing to help out a little. Phyllis had told her she would pass the message along. Then Phyllis looked at me and said she was sorry she had taken so long to check on me. I told her it was all right. I meant it. I never went back to that house. Not to help, not to visit, not to prove anything. I didn't need to walk back through that door with evidence of everything I had built. The beach house was not a trophy. It was just a place that had been waiting for me to need it, and when I finally did, it was enough. My parents threw me out on the worst night I had known in years. They never asked where I went. They never knew about the company, and they never knew about this place. Some things you build quietly, for yourself alone, and you never owe anyone an explanation for surviving. If this story moved you, please subscribe to Core Revenge Tales and hit the bell so you never miss what comes next.